I used to think I understood my stepfather. He was predictable, calm, composed, and always carrying that air of quiet confidence that made people trust him instantly. Maybe it came with being a dentist, working with nervous patients every day, easing their fears with steady hands and an easy smile. He had always been good at that, making people feel at ease. Even me. For the past 5 years, he'd been in my life, ever since my mom remarried. At first, I kept my distance, unsure of how to feel about him taking the place of my real father, who had left when I was too young to remember. But over time, things changed. He became familiar, a part of our routine, someone who fit into the gaps of our small family without forcing it. Then, my mom told us she'd be leaving for a few days. Her friend from another city was having a birthday party, and of course she couldn't miss it. At first, I didn't think much of it. A few days alone with my stepfather wasn't a big deal. But after she left, something shifted. It started with small things. The way he looked at me lingered, just a little longer than before. The way he sat across from me at the dinner table, quiet but thoughtful, as if seeing me for the first time. The way he seemed to hesitate before speaking, as if there was something he wanted to say but couldn't. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was imagining things. But as the days passed, the changes became harder to dismiss. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to find him already there, leaning against the counter, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He never drank at home, at least not around us. "Hey," I said cautiously, stepping inside. "You okay?" He looked up, as if startled by my voice. Then he smiled, just a little. "Yeah, just thinking." I didn't ask what about. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. We stood in silence for a moment, the air between us thick with something I couldn't quite name. Finally, I turned to grab a glass of water, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. "You've grown up a lot," he said suddenly. I froze, my fingers tightening around the glass. "What?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "I just mean, I remember when you were 15, still arguing with your mom about curfews and sneaking out with your friends." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "That was a long time ago." "Yeah," he agreed. "It was." I forced a smile, pretending not to notice the way his eyes flickered over me, taking in the oversized sweater I wore, the bare legs underneath. Pretending not to feel the shift in the air as he took a slow sip of his drink, watching me over the rim of the glass. Maybe I was imagining things. Or maybe, for the first time in years, I was really seeing him. And he was seeing me, too. His words hung in the air longer than they should have, making my skin prickle with an odd awareness. He was still watching me, his gaze unreadable, the amber liquid swirling lazily in his glass. I cleared my throat, forcing a chuckle. "Well, I'm not sneaking out anymore. Mom's been too busy to notice if I did anyway." He smiled, but there was something different in it, something thoughtful. Then, as if remembering something, he set his drink down on the counter and straightened up. "You know," he said casually, "I don't think I've ever properly examined your teeth." I blinked at him. "What?" "Your teeth," he repeated, his tone professional now, as if the conversation had never strayed into uncertain territory. "Oral health is important, and I don't think I've ever given you a proper checkup." I laughed, half out of nerves, half out of disbelief. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." He folded his arms over his chest, one brow arching slightly. "You drink way too much soda, and I've seen you skip flossing more than once." I rolled my eyes. "You watch me floss." He chuckled. "I notice things. Bad habits, mostly. It's part of my job." I hesitated, glancing toward the hallway. My mom wasn't home. It was just us. A strange feeling curled in my stomach, a mix of amusement and uncertainty. But then again, this was harmless. He was a dentist, after all. "Fine," I sighed, playing along. "Where do you want to do this? You don't have your fancy chair and tools here." "The couch will do," he said, pushing off the counter. I laughed again, shaking my head as I followed him into the living room. "This is ridiculous." He smirked. "Says the girl who's about to get a free dental checkup from an expert." I sat down on the couch, feeling a little self-conscious as he moved to stand in front of me. He cracked his knuckles, tilting his head slightly. "All right, open up." I huffed. "You're not even wearing gloves. Do you want me to?" I shrugged, suddenly feeling silly for making this a big deal. "No, I guess not." He leaned in, closer than I expected, and gently placed a hand under my chin. His fingers were warm against my skin, his touch firm yet careful. "Relax," he murmured, his voice softer now. "Tilt your head back a little." I swallowed, the odd fluttering in my stomach returning as I obeyed. His thumb brushed lightly against my jaw as he adjusted my position, and for some reason, the touch made my breath hitch just slightly. His focus was completely on my mouth now. His expression had shifted into something entirely professional, almost clinical, as he examined my teeth. He murmured after a moment. "Your gums look a little inflamed. Do you floss regularly?" I scoffed, trying to ignore the way my face was heating up. "You already know the answer to that." He chuckled, and I could feel the warmth of his breath ghosting over my lips. "You need to be better about it. You don't want gum disease, do you?" I rolled my eyes. "No, I don't." His fingers moved lightly, his touch careful as he checked each tooth. His thumb brushed against the corner of my mouth, his other fingers steadying my jaw as he examined me. "Any sensitivity?" he asked, his voice quieter now. I shook my head slightly, or at least as much as I could with his hand still holding me in place. "Not really." His gaze flicked to mine for the briefest moment before he refocused on my mouth. He was close. Too close. I hadn't really noticed it at first, but now, sitting like this, his knee almost touching mine, his face just inches from mine, I could feel it. The shift. He was still the same man who had been in my life for 5 years. The same stepfather who had driven me to school when my mom was too busy. The same one who had helped me with my math homework, even when I insisted I didn't need it. The same one who had always felt like a steady, dependable presence in our home. But right now, in this moment, I was seeing him differently. His fingers, still resting under my jaw, felt too warm. The way his eyes lingered on my lips for a second too long made my breath quicken. I wondered if he noticed. "Your teeth are straight," he murmured finally, his voice dropping just a little lower. "You've got a good smile." I swallowed. "Thanks." He didn't move right away. Instead, his thumb brushed absently over my skin, tracing along the edge of my jaw before he finally let go. I exhaled, feeling like I'd been holding my breath the entire time. "There," he said, straightening up, his tone returning to its usual lightness. "Not too bad, but you really do need to floss more." I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the strange feeling settling over me. "Noted, doctor." His lips twitched. "I'll check again in a week." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, are we making this a regular thing now? Until you prove to me that you're taking better care of your teeth?" "Absolutely." I rolled my eyes but couldn't fight the small smile tugging at my lips. Maybe I had imagined the moment. Maybe it was nothing. But as he turned away, running a hand through his hair, I couldn't help but wonder. Had he felt it too? The moment passed, but something about it lingered. Maybe it was the way his fingers had brushed against my skin, the way his gaze had flickered toward mine just a second too long. Or maybe it was just me, overthinking like I always did. I was still sitting on the couch, trying to shake off the strange tension in the air, when he suddenly clapped his hands together. "You hungry?" The casual shift in conversation caught me off guard. I blinked up at him. Yeah, I guess." He grinned, running a hand through his dark hair. "Good. Let's cook something together. Something delicious." I tilted my head, amused. "You cook?" His grin widened. "I do, actually." Your mom is usually in charge of the kitchen, but I know my way around it. I crossed my arms. All right, let's see what you've got then. He chuckled. Not so fast. We're cooking together. I groaned dramatically but stood up anyway. Fine. But if this goes wrong, I'm blaming you. Fair deal. We walked into the kitchen, and he immediately started rummaging through the fridge. How about pasta? Something simple but good. Sounds safe, I teased, hopping onto the counter and watching as he pulled out ingredients. Not very impressive, though. He shot me a playful look. You want something gourmet? I shrugged, swinging my legs. I was expecting a 5-star meal. He chuckled. All right, now I have something to prove. As he began chopping garlic, I grabbed the pasta, deciding to actually help instead of just watching. The kitchen filled with the rich scent of garlic and butter sizzling in the pan, and for the first time that evening, the air between us felt light again. We worked side by side, laughing when he nearly dropped the bottle of olive oil, teasing each other when I added too much chili flakes to the sauce. Careful, he warned with a smirk. You might set your mouth on fire. I stuck my tongue out at him. I can handle it. Yeah. He raised an eyebrow, dipping a spoon into the sauce and holding it up to me. Try it. I hesitated for just a second before leaning in to take a taste. The moment my lips brushed against the spoon, his gaze flickered down, and for the briefest moment, something passed between us again. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. It's good. His lips quirked up slightly, but he said nothing, just nodded and turned back to the stove. The moment should have been insignificant. Just a taste test. Nothing more. But my heart was beating too fast. I needed to say something. Anything. So, I blurted out, desperate to break the silence. Should I call you chef now? He laughed, shaking his head. No, but actually. He turned to face me, leaning against the counter, his expression unreadable. I raised an eyebrow. What? For tonight, he said, voice softer now. Just call me Ryan. I blinked. He had never asked me that before. He had always been my stepfather, always the one with a certain level of authority in the house, even if he wasn't overbearing about it. I swallowed. Ryan. His lips twitched. Yeah, just for tonight. I hesitated, feeling the weight of his request. It shouldn't have mattered. It was just a name. But something about saying it out loud felt different. Okay, Ryan. His gaze held mine for a second longer before he turned back to the stove, stirring the sauce as if nothing had changed. But it had. I could feel it. By the time my mom came home, I had convinced myself that nothing had happened. The way he had looked at me, the way I had felt when I said his name, the small, fleeting moments in the kitchen. It was all in my head. Or at least, that's what I told myself. She arrived in the afternoon, wheeling her suitcase inside, her voice bright as she greeted us. I missed you too. How was everything? Ryan, no, my stepfather, smiled easily, stepping forward to take her bag. Everything was fine. How was the trip? My mom started talking about her friend's birthday, how much fun they'd had, but as she spoke, her eyes drifted toward me. I forced a smile, hoping it looked natural. But she kept watching me. Then her gaze flickered to Ryan. It was subtle. A brief glance. Barely noticeable. But the way her expression changed, just slightly, made my stomach twist. She had noticed something. I wasn't sure what. Maybe it was the way we weren't acting quite normal. The way I was avoiding looking at him. The way he seemed too relaxed, too at ease, as if nothing had happened. But my mother was perceptive. Her eyes lingered on me for a second longer before she turned back to him, smiling again. Well, she said, I hope she wasn't too much trouble while I was gone. Ryan smirked, shooting me a glance. Not at all. We actually had a good time. My mom raised an eyebrow. Oh, that's a first. I forced out a laugh. Yeah, well, we made pasta. Ryan chuckled. She tried to burn my mouth off with chili flakes. My mom laughed, shaking her head. That sounds about right. She moved past us, heading toward the bedroom to unpack. I let out a quiet breath, relieved. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe she hadn't noticed anything. But then, as she passed, she reached out and lightly touched my shoulder. You okay, sweetheart? I looked up, startled by the sudden question. She was smiling, but there was something behind her eyes. A quiet concern. A suspicion. I swallowed. Yeah, I'm fine. She hesitated, then nodded. Good. And just like that, she walked away. But the unease in my chest remained. Had she noticed something? Had Ryan? I wasn't sure. But one thing I did know. Something between us had changed. And I didn't know if we could ever go back. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that everything was normal. That nothing had changed. That the way Ryan had asked me to call him by his first name was nothing more than a casual request. That the way he had looked at me in the kitchen, the way I had felt when he had touched my jaw during the so-called dental checkup, was all just in my head. But the problem was, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I was starting to think he couldn't either. My mother had gone back to work, slipping back into her usual routine as if she had never left. The house fell into its familiar rhythm, except, this time, something was different. Ryan and I didn't talk about that night in the kitchen, but the air between us was heavier now, laced with something unspoken. He wasn't distant. If anything, he was closer. Subtle things. The way he stood near me when we passed each other in the hallway. The way his hand would brush against my back when he moved past me in the kitchen. The way his gaze lingered a second longer than it should when he spoke to me. I knew I should ignore it, but I didn't. Maybe I didn't want to. It was late afternoon, and my mom was still at work. I was in my room, curled up on my bed with my phone, scrolling mindlessly, trying to distract myself from the strange thoughts that had been plaguing me. Then there was a soft knock at my door. Come in, I called, sitting up slightly. The door creaked open, and Ryan stepped inside. I felt my stomach tighten at the sight of him. He was dressed casually, sweatpants, a fitted t-shirt, and there was something effortless about the way he carried himself, something that made my breath catch in my throat. Hey, he said, leaning against the doorframe. Hey, I replied, setting my phone down. He hesitated for a moment before stepping further into the room. I was thinking, he said casually, I should check your teeth again. I blinked. You're kidding, I said, half laughing. He smirked. I told you I'd check again in a week. I rolled my eyes. You were serious about that? Of course, he said, walking closer. Oral health is important, remember? There was something playful in his tone, but there was also something else. Something that sent a slow warmth curling through my chest. I hesitated, but then, without really thinking about it, I nodded. Okay, I said softly. His smirk faded slightly, replaced by something more serious. Lie back, he said, gesturing to my bed. I swallowed, my pulse quickening, but I did as he asked, shifting until I was lying on my back, my head resting on the pillow. He sat down beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence. Then, just like before, his hand found my chin. His fingers were warm, gentle, tilting my face up slightly. Open, he murmured. I did. He leaned in, his breath warm against my skin as he examined me. It should have felt normal, casual, professional, but it didn't. His thumb brushed lightly against my jaw, his fingers resting against my cheek. My heart pounded in my chest, and I was suddenly, acutely aware of every point of contact between us. Your gums still look a little irritated, he murmured, his voice softer than before. You haven't been flossing, have you? I tried to answer, but my voice came out breathless. His gaze flicked to mine. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. But the air between us was charged, thick with something unspoken, something undeniable. I could feel his fingers against my skin, feel the warmth of his breath, so close to mine. And then, slowly, deliberately, his thumb brushed against my lower lip. I inhaled sharply. His gaze darkened, his hand lingering for just a second longer before he finally pulled back. "There," he said, his voice a little rougher now. "Your teeth are fine." I swallowed hard, sitting up slightly, trying to steady my breathing. "Thanks," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. He held my gaze for a moment longer, then stood up. "You should really start flossing," he said, his tone lighter now, but there was something unreadable in his expression. I nodded, unable to form words. And then, just like that, he turned and walked out of my room, leaving me there, my heart pounding, my thoughts spinning. Something between us had shifted. Again. And this time, I didn't think we could ignore it.